The CFO didn't even say my name, just slid a manila envelope across the polished oak like he was handing off a menu. We're cutting costs, so you're gone. That's all. 10 words. No thank you, no summary of service, not even a rehearsed HR apology. Just the synthetic stench of his cologne and the echo of those 10 syllables bouncing around a room full of men, pretending not to look me in the eye. I didn't respond. Didn't blink. I folded the envelope once, tucked it under my palm, and stood up. As I turned toward the door, I caught it. A rustle of papers, a sharp inhale. One of the investors, Robert Finch, peeking over the CFO's shoulder at a line on the term sheet. His face went ghost white. Eyes shot to the ceiling like someone just read him the date of his own funeral. But I didn't stay to enjoy the panic. That wasn't the moment yet. That was just the spark. Outside the boardroom, the hallway lights flickered like they always do when the motion sensor delays. I could still hear them shuffling chairs inside, whispering like frat boys who'd just broken something expensive. I didn't care. 11 years of building compliance infrastructure, ghostwriting policies, shepherding 5 federal contracts through audits, scrubbed out of the company in under 60 seconds. On paper, I was non-essential. But paperwork lies, especially when no one reads the fine print. Which reminds me, if you're listening and haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please do. Only 3 out of 100 listeners actually subscribe, and it helps our whole team keep these stories coming. Also, drop a like if this one already has you side-eyeing your HR department. Back to it. By the time I reached the elevator, my badge was already deactivated. The red light pulsed as if mocking me. Denied. 2 interns had to tailgate me out of the building. Neither said a word. I walked to my car, sat behind the wheel, and didn't drive. Not yet. Just sat there and listened. The silence was sharp. My pulse was steady. I'd known this day might come, ever since the new CFO, Mark with the perfect teeth and no soul, started sniffing around my budgets like a dog casing a pantry. What he didn't know, what none of them remembered, was that 2 years ago, during a sleepy summer lull in filings, I'd quietly written myself into the company's key person insurance policy, a clause tucked neatly under Schedule C, Section 9, Continuity Officer, Conditional Liability. A mouthful, sure. But it meant this. If I exited without formal transition and oversight, 3 federal contracts would automatically pause pending regulatory reassessment. And reassessment takes weeks. Weeks where vendors don't get paid, where milestones freeze, where investors get very, very nervous. I hadn't planned to activate it like this. I thought I'd have more warning, but maybe that's the brilliance of it, because now the clock was ticking. Not for me, but for them. And all I had to do was wait. 2 years ago, during a week when the entire C-suite was off at some golf retreat pretending to negotiate with federal vendors, I stayed behind. The excuse was budget closeouts. The reality? I needed uninterrupted time to finish rewriting the risk architecture before another procurement cycle buried me alive. That's when I slipped it in. Just a few lines, written in the driest legalese I could craft without drawing red flags. Titled it, Continuity Provisions for Designated Risk Officers, and buried it 2 levels deep in the annual vendor requalification binder. I even made sure it looked boring. No bold fonts, no flags, nothing clickable. Just text. Lots of it. It wasn't forged. It wasn't even sneaky. I had the authority. I'd earned that authority the hard way, by being the person who always stayed late, always spotted the typo in the 6th paragraph of the 9th page of a contract written in size 8 font. The kind of work that gets called thankless by execs who've never filed a single compliance certificate themselves. So when I submitted it, no one blinked. Legal reviewed it and rubber stamped it. Finance filed it. Nobody ever read the details. And why would they? I wasn't flashy. I wasn't strategic. I was just the lady with the risk maps, the policy deadlines, the vendor flags. Mark once joked I was basically a walking antivirus for the company, said it in front of the whole team, like I was supposed to blush. I just smiled and said, "Some viruses are airborne, others are human." He didn't laugh. Now here we were. That clause, my clause, was binding, and it didn't need my help to activate. It simply required absence. No notice, no exit interview, no transition plan. Clause 12.4 kicked in automatically. And thanks to a little oversight nobody thought twice about, it had been tied to the funding schedule of 3 federal contracts that required a certified risk continuity officer on file. Me. Only me. I didn't need to tell anyone. The clause did that for me. It was already moving. Within 12 hours of my badge being deactivated, the first alert hit the contract portal. Personnel verification. Pending. Continuity officer unconfirmed. 6 hours later, the compliance dashboard flashed a red triangle. That one meant automatic disbursement freeze. Mark probably didn't even notice. He was likely too busy updating his LinkedIn with phrases like strategic cost optimization and courageous change agent. By the following morning, 2 payments had already bounced back. Small ones, sure, but in government contract land, a missed $11,000 payment is how investigations start. Because if the money bounces, someone asks why, and when someone asks why, they start reading. That's how it started unraveling. One of the junior compliance analysts on the investor side, not even ours, flagged the clause. Just a kid with a clipboard, trying to impress his manager. He clicked a hyperlink, opened a PDF, saw my name, saw the signature. Saw the words, no offboarding or replacement documentation, automatic risk designation trigger. And then everything changed. I didn't hear it, but I imagined the moment it happened. Someone in legal scanning the clause, realizing what they'd co-signed 2 years ago, realizing what it meant now, realizing they'd just fired the one person holding the lock to 3 active federal streams. It wasn't sabotage, it was insurance. Filed in plain sight, approved by everyone who now wish they'd actually read it, and this time, nobody could pretend they didn't know my name. My email access vanished by 9:06 a.m. The system booted me mid-session while I was pulling a copy of last year's GSA alignment summary. Ironic, really, since that file was one of the few things keeping the company legally clean. No goodbye message, no thank you for your service boilerplate, just a 403 error and a cold terminal screen. HR didn't send a checklist. IT didn't call for asset retrieval. I half expected a courier to show up for my laptop, but nothing came. Not a peep, like I'd never existed. It was almost elegant, in a way. They thought they were being swift, efficient, the kind of cut that doesn't leave a mess. Only thing is, when you pull out a keystone, the arch doesn't collapse immediately. It holds. For a second. Long enough to let you believe you did the right thing. Long enough for everyone to start moving forward. Then comes the silence. Then comes the crack. The first call didn't come from anyone I knew. No familiar area code. Just a number I almost ignored. Something about it, though. Maybe the stillness of my house, the lack of notification chimes, the eerie vacuum left behind by a career amputated so cleanly. I answered. "Is this Ms. Langston?" the voice asked. Clipped and formal. Yes. Who's asking? This is Martin Ralston. I'm part of the legal compliance division at Foresight Capital. We're an equity stakeholder in Holcroft Systems. Silence stretched between us like a tightrope. Then, I believe there's a clause in your name that's just gone live. You'll want to see this. I didn't speak, just pulled my personal laptop closer, opened the encrypted archive I hadn't touched in months, and navigated straight to the clause index. It was there. Still clean. Still untouched. Section 12.4, tagged with my digital signature, my certification ID, and, most importantly, a timestamp that verified its status as live, reviewed, and valid. He cleared his throat. Are you aware that 3 contract triggers have been escalated in the last 24 hours? We were contacted by a federal vendor requesting an updated continuity officer record. I almost laughed. And did they find one? No, he said. They found a clause with your name and a condition that states no offboarding file, no replacement designee, no continued disbursement. That appears to be problematic. I'm aware. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just missing from the org chart. I was a ghost in the foundation, a name they thought they erased, but whose signature still lived in all the places they hadn't thought to clean. Because here's the thing about corporate ecosystems. They forget the people who keep the gears turning, but they never erase the gears. Not entirely. The call ended politely, with the kind of strained courtesy lawyers use when they're trying to figure out if you're the villain or the solution. I didn't offer clarity. Let them squirm. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, watching the status dashboard on a government compliance portal tick from processing to hold. It took 11 seconds, then 2 more turned amber. I didn't have an office, I didn't have a badge, I didn't even have a goodbye. But I had the claws. And now they had silence. The next morning, I took my coffee across the street from Holcroft's main building, the kind of place that calls itself a cafe but charges $6 for burnt espresso and a splash of milk. I didn't go for the coffee. I went for the view. From that corner seat by the window, I had the perfect angle into the 4th floor. Executive operations, legal, and the smaller of the 2 boardrooms, what they used for damage control. Usually, the blinds stayed open. Some posturing ritual, letting everyone see their glass fishbowl of power. Today, they dropped one by one. A slow cascade of vertical white slats shutting out the world like guilty eyelids blinking shut. Security buzzed twice. First time, I saw them escorting someone I didn't recognize. Mid-level, maybe finance. Second time, it was Todd from facilities, jogging across the marble with a box of printed contracts like his life depended on it. He looked rattled, sweaty. That was the real tell. Todd never runs. Inside, shadows moved. You know how it looks when someone's arguing behind glass? You don't hear the words, but the gestures give it away. Pointing, standing, sitting again. One guy slapped a manila folder down so hard I saw it bounce. Another gripped his temples like he was trying to contain a migraine made of pure regret. I sipped my coffee. It was awful. Didn't matter. See? This was never about making noise. I'd learned long ago that volume doesn't scare men like Mark. What scares them is control they didn't know they gave away. That's what was happening behind those blinds. Realization crashing into ignorance at full speed. They hadn't fired a risk officer. They'd severed the regulatory spine of their operation with a steak knife and now wondered why their legs weren't moving. Someone inside finally opened a laptop and projected something on the boardroom screen. I didn't need binoculars. I knew exactly what they were staring at. The claws. My claws. Probably zoomed in on the digital signature block, watching the cursor hover over my name like it might blink and vanish if they stared hard enough. I imagined Mark pacing. He always did that when he couldn't yell. His power came from swagger, not substance. And swagger doesn't fix frozen contracts. It doesn't soothe investors whose disbursements are delayed by federal hold flags. It doesn't explain to the board why 3 compliance chains now require written reinstatement from one person, the one he slid a layoff letter to without reading what was stapled to the back. And now, every phone in that office would be vibrating with whispers. Legal calling legal. Investors calling analysts. Analysts calling anyone who knew what the hell Continuity Clause 12.4 even was. They'd pull old emails, dig through archived minutes, try to reconstruct a paper trail they thought was irrelevant. But here's the problem with forensic panic. It always starts too late. They'd learn soon enough that I didn't just monitor risk. I held the designation certificate that bound Holcroft's most sensitive federal contracts to a named continuity custodian. Me. I'd never bragged about it, never explained it. I just did the work. Quietly. Correctly. And now the work was doing the explaining for me. Across the street, their panic bloomed like a fire behind a frosted glass. People moved faster. Faces changed. Even from here, I could see the difference, how confusion turned to fear, how confidence deflated into huddled phone calls and closed doors. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just took another sip of coffee and watched. They finally knew. I wasn't the risk manager. I was the lock, and they had thrown away the only key. 48 hours after the layoff, the freeze went system-wide. It started small, just a paused payment confirmation on the compliance dashboard. But Holcroft's dashboards don't go dark unless something upstream fails. And upstream in this case meant Washington. 3 active federal contracts, each with their own risk continuity requirement, each tied by name to me. The first notification came from the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. Subject line: Urgent. Risk designation interruption. 2 hours later, the Department of Defense Contracting Office filed a formal disbursement hold citing non-verifiable compliance assurance. And then came the Office of Regulatory Grants. That one didn't even ask questions, just hit pause. The money stopped. Not slowed, not delayed, stopped. And when federal funds stop, everything downstream seizes like an engine out of oil. Vendors panic. Internal budgets collapse. Finance starts breathing into paper bags. CFO Mark, in his infinite arrogance, tried to spin it, claimed it was a clerical error, blamed new policy documentation. He even tried throwing the word cyber attack around in a call with the investors, hoping the ambiguity would confuse everyone just long enough for him to buy time. But you can't bluff through federal systems. They don't play poker, they play audit. By the third morning, our main project officer from the Grants Oversight Division personally called the Holcroft executive line. His request was surgical. We need Ms. Langston present in the next meeting to confirm continuity. No substitutes, no proxies. The room reportedly went silent. I was told later that Mark, still red-faced from fielding back-to-back calls from furious procurement officers, had the audacity to ask, "Can't we just issue a backdated transition?" Someone in legal nearly choked, because Clause 12.4 wasn't a formality, it was a trigger, and unlike most things in corporate compliance, it didn't allow retroactive fixes. Once breached, it locked until the originator either authenticated a re-entry plan or the government imposed a full risk reassessment, which usually meant starting the contract process over, from scratch. 60 to 90 days of purgatory. That's when they realized it wasn't just the clause, it was me. They hadn't just laid off someone who filed reports. They'd terminated the individual whose presence was required by law to keep 3 revenue streams alive. And not just anyone could fill that role. It had to be a certified officer with continuity designation, fingerprinted and approved by federal oversight with at least 3 years of documented operational compliance in that vertical. There were exactly 4 people in the entire company with that status, and 3 of them worked for me. None of them qualified as successors, because Mark had never filed the successor documentation. He was too busy trimming non-essential staff to read what he was cutting. So when the regulators asked to speak to me, nobody from Holcroft called. Not right away, but the investors did. They didn't demand, they didn't threaten, they requested, nicely. "We'd appreciate it if you could clarify a few procedural questions. Would you be open to a quick call?" I was polite. Of course I was. I always am. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten back. I didn't need to. Clause 12.4 was doing all the talking for me, and the only sound left on Holcroft's end was the ticking of a clock they could no longer reset. The boardroom looked different now, like someone had drained all the color out of it. No polite chatter. No catered breakfast. Just silence so thick it pressed against the walls. Even the lights felt dimmer, like they knew the script had flipped and the usual power players weren't holding the pen anymore. They'd asked me to come in for clarification, which was a desperate man's euphemism for, "We need you to unbreak what we shattered." I didn't rush. I dressed in the same slate gray blazer I used to wear when escorting regulators through audit week. Simple, clean, professional. A reminder. When I walked in, the chairs didn't scrape. The conversations didn't resume. Every head turned toward the thick packet in the center of the table, open to a single page. Page 9.3, Clause 12.4 was printed in full, underlined in red. My name sat above the signature line, unmistakable, authenticated with timestamp, certification ID, and internal reference code. I could see from the thickness of the packet that someone had dug deep. They'd pulled every annex, every subclause, every buried schedule I'd tucked into the risk architecture like bones under floorboards. It must have taken hours. Or a full legal team. I took the empty seat across from Mark. He didn't speak. His jaw looked tight like he was chewing glass behind those perfect teeth. At the head of the table, Chairwoman Ellison cleared her throat. "We understand you filed this clause independently?" I nodded. "I filed it under my authority as Risk Continuity Officer, per my designation contract and federal requirement, CFR 26.2. Her eyes didn't waver. "And was the clause reviewed?" "Approved by in-house legal and finance. No objections. Filed during the annual vendor audit cycle. All documentation is date-stamped and stored in Holcroft's internal compliance repository." She tapped the stack gently. "We've seen it. But there's no filed transition for your role, no named successor." "There wouldn't be," I said calmly. I was never informed of succession planning, nor was I consulted on offboarding procedures. Mark finally spoke, his voice raspier than usual. It wasn't, Personal. We had to make cuts. You weren't the only one. I'm aware, I said, but I was the only one with an active federal continuity designation, which, as your legal team now understands, binds multiple live contracts to my presence, or, at minimum, my signed transition file. He swallowed hard. So you're saying this, he gestured to the clause, the pile, the mess, is permanent unless you fix it? I'm not saying anything. The clause already did. I reached into my bag and slid a slim folder across the table. Clean. Tidy. Inside were printed copies of the original filing, the digital trail, the certification approvals, and a notarized log of who had accessed the clause since activation. Every timestamp, every attempt to override it, every system denial. Chairwoman Ellison opened it and gave a single, sharp nod. No tampering, she murmured to legal. It's airtight. Then she turned back to me. If we were to rectify this, what would you require? I didn't flinch. Full reinstatement under a revised title. Strategic Continuity Advisor, direct reporting to the board, risk architecture to be moved out from under finance. And I want final review on all compliance protocols moving forward. No one argued. Mark tried to shift in his chair, but no one looked at him. He was no longer part of the equation, just the man who pulled the wrong thread, thinking it was loose fabric, never realizing it was the seam. No one clapped. No one smiled. I didn't need applause. I had the clause, I had the seat, and now I had the leverage. They didn't fire a staffer. They severed the keystone, and I was here to hand them the receipt. The lights were already on when I stepped back onto the 4th floor. Early morning, no fanfare, just the quiet hum of systems waking up from forced dormancy. Screens flickered, key cards beeped. The glass doors whispered shut behind me with a finality that said everything without needing to say a word. Contracts had been reinstated the night before. Emergency filings pushed through after my clause was formally acknowledged, and a temporary compliance agreement drafted under my terms. No apology attached, just paperwork. The only language this company really understands. The real noise didn't come from celebration. It came from silence. Emails no longer bouncing, vendor calls no longer redirected, payments finally processing after 48 hours of red flags and radio static. Holcroft's heartbeat had returned, and I was the pulse. HR didn't make an announcement. They never do when it's about saving face. But I did see Mark. Not in the office. God, no. He didn't even make it to noon. 2 security officers, clean suits, and blank faces walked him out the side entrance. No yelling, no bags. Just a cardboard box that wasn't full enough to justify his ego. Someone had already erased his name from the directory by the time he hit the parking lot. Later that day, an internal memo went out with the subject line, Organizational Realignment, Compliance and Continuity Operations. No header, no graphic, just 3 paragraphs. The second one read, Effective immediately, Ms. Eleanor Langston will serve as Strategic Continuity Advisor, reporting directly to the board and Chairwoman Ellison. Risk architecture and compliance protocol ownership will reside under her office, independent of finance and operational planning. There were no emojis, no exclamation marks, but every manager read it twice. I returned to my old office only to find it occupied by someone from procurement who refused to make eye contact. I didn't care. I didn't need that space. I requested a new one, near legal, tucked in the administrative wing where the air runs cooler and nobody forgets to sign forms. They hadn't installed a nameplate yet. Probably didn't know what to call me or how long I planned to stay. Someone, probably Jesse from records, had slapped a yellow sticky note on the door. One word, all caps, essential. I left it there, didn't touch it, didn't adjust it, let it wrinkle from the humidity, curl slightly at the corners, like truth finally breathing after being buried for years. I didn't hold a grudge. Grudges take time. I preferred structure, reforms, new reporting lines, new review gates, new rules for succession filings that I would now personally verify. The whispers around the office weren't loud, just cautious, measured. Someone from engineering passed me in the hall and mumbled, "Glad you're back." Someone else from finance didn't say anything, but moved to the other side of the hallway as I approached. Vindication didn't need a banner. It came in the form of systems that worked. deadlines that held, and a boardroom that finally understood who built the scaffolding they'd been standing on this whole time. No more badge scans, no more questions. Lights on, doors closed. And this time, I was the one holding the keys. I didn't want the corner office. They offered it, of course. Like some compensation prize wrapped in glass and ego. Desk with a view, personal fridge, customized lighting. I turned it down without blinking. Offices are for people who want visibility. I already had something better. Control of the architecture. Reporting lines. My first move was surgical. I requested a full mapping of all compliance-related functions across Holcroft. Every handoff, every signature authority, every advisory role that had been created to stroke an exec's title inflation. It was a mess. A hydra. Risk had been jammed under finance for years, like a utility bill nobody wanted to read but everyone claimed to understand. That changed in a single memo. Effective immediately, all risk continuity functions will report directly to strategic continuity operations under Ms. Langston. Finance is no longer a gatekeeper for compliance decisions. Just like that, Mark's legacy, his neat little empire of bottlenecked approvals and buried flags, was wiped off the map. The CFO's role no longer touched risk. Not in funding, not in hiring, not in oversight. I didn't fire anyone. I just erased their ladders. You want authority? Climb through structure, not charm. Next came the clause. Clause 12.4 had served its purpose. It had frozen 3 contracts, exposed procedural decay, and reminded a dozen board members what happens when you treat legal infrastructure like boilerplate. But it wasn't perfect. It had one flaw. Me. The clause was a single point of failure, something I'd once justified as job security. Now, I knew better, so I rewrote it. 3 successors, handpicked, trained by me, certified, fingerprinted, and shadowing my role across every federal vertical, each with time-delayed authorization, triggers, and staggered activation rights. Not because I plan to leave, but because legacy means nothing if it dies with you. Legal took a week to draft the revisions. I rewrote them in an afternoon. Policy 7.3 revision log now included my initials next to a new line. Successor structure, triple redundancy with rotational continuity review. No one dared edit it. I met with Chairwoman Ellison one-on-one. She asked if I wanted a new team. I told her I already had one. They just didn't know it yet. I picked analysts from the floor, operations staff who'd sat quietly during meetings but sent flawless reports every week. I chose structure over spotlight. Always. HR sent a second welcome memo that tried to soften the tone of the first, called my reinstatement a return to optimal compliance leadership. I ignored it. Optics were for marketers. I wasn't there to look good. I was there to make sure nobody ever confused decor for foundation again. The shift wasn't loud. There was no announcement, just a quiet reordering of paths. Approval flows that used to climb through finance now landed at my desk. Vendor escalations that once took 6 days now resolved in 2. The org chart changed, slowly, deliberately, and every step of that change came from the same principle. No more choke points, no more fiefdoms, just structure, just flow. They gave me a chair. I built the scaffolding around it, then I bolted it to the floor. The final document entered the system at 2:43 p.m. on a Thursday. No one gathered to watch, no one made a speech. It wasn't even labeled anything dramatic, just continuity protocol, tier Y systems, tagged with my employee ID, version control, and a single red asterisk that marked it as immutable without board-level override. I didn't need applause. I needed permanence. It was the policy I'd wanted to implement 5 years earlier, back when I still believed in proposals, when I still thought logic could outpace ego. It had been shelved then. Too restrictive, they said. Too much friction for fast-moving teams. What they really meant was too much accountability. This version wasn't up for debate. It was clean, bulletproof. No executive could push a contract forward without a certified continuity officer's sign-off. Real certification, not rubber-stamped by some CFO's favorite nephew. All clause overrides required 2 keys, one from risk, one from legal. No more finance detours, no more middle manager loopholes. The board didn't resist. Not this time. They read it. Silently. Chairwoman Ellison didn't ask questions, just nodded once, then gestured to the General Counsel to update the filing protocol per my embedded recommendations. I watched as the new rules propagated through the system. The intranet updated its documentation links. The risk dashboard pushed a notification. Continuity protocol revised. Action required. Emails began to go out. People would click. Some would skim. A few would panic. The quiet clause tucked at the end was mine. It didn't carry my name in bold. Just a line that read, "All critical roles subject to Clause 12.4 must maintain a succession map, reviewed quarterly. Final accountability resides with strategic continuity operations. No exceptions, no vengeance, no fireworks, just correction." The mistakes that triggered my firing would never be repeated, not because they learned their lesson, but because I wrote it into the damn infrastructure. Outside, the sky was turning gray, one of those long Midwestern autumns where you forget what time it is because the light never fully arrives or leaves. I packed up, walked the quiet halls, past a few familiar faces who nodded and quickly returned to their screens. No one dared ask if I was back. The word no longer applied. I wasn't part of the old structure anymore. I was the structure. In the lobby, the glass reflected the old Holcroft logo behind me, sleek, meaningless branding that had survived 4 rebrands and 2 mergers. It looked smaller now. At the exit, someone had left a new badge envelope at reception. My name on it. Inside, a single key card. The role title? No department, no rank, just 3 words in small uppercase print. Custodian of continuity. I didn't smile. I scanned the card, walked out, and let the doors seal behind me, quiet as a clause locking into place. Not a return. A redesign.